Now, here's a very sensitive topic. I think this topic is going to be a little bit sensitive, just like most of the topics that we touch here on our podcast. But I just want you guys to hear me out first, process what I'm saying before you go ahead and start condemning me. Okay. Now, I want to start off by saying criminals will always exist. Crime will always be a thing. And my point of view on it is crime should be organized, right? Um, and what I mean by that is we used to have um, gangs, organized groups, or the mafia, whatever you want to call them, that used to run certain parts of a city or certain areas or certain neighborhoods. And I remember in the 90s, the police department like heavily started going after criminal organizations using in the 80s and 90s they started going after these first they were going after the mafia with the RICO Act. Then they started using the RICO Act for gangs, for local gangs and everything else like that. And a lot of these what we call OGs, a lot of these guys, they ended up getting arrested and going to jail, right? And when these OGs or these organized groups of gangs, mafia, mobs, or whatever you want to call them, when they got arrested, what happened was there were no OGs around, which OG stands for original gangsters. For those of you who don't know, those are like the big brothers. There was no OGs around to teach the young guys the rules, how they shouldn't do certain things to attract so much attention. Violence should be like a last resort, and also that civilians should not be involved in their activities. So now you have this new generation of what they call cliques, you know, and what these cliques do is, one group set up a clique A and another one set up a clique B, and they say, well, we're rivals, so we're just supposed to massacre each other for whatever reason, right? It has nothing to do with money, it has nothing to do with territory. It's just we're different cliques, we're supposed to hate each other, and we're supposed to go after each other. And when they go after each other, there's no rules, you know. Uh, they would shoot up a kid's birthday party. They would go to a funeral and do the same thing. Um, they would do a drive by on a home and not care who's in the home or whatever the case may be. They're going after that one individual, but they don't care who's involved in it. And this is why you notice now in America we're so unsafe. We feel so unsafe, and there's so much violence happening, like senseless, unnecessary violence happening because you know, it's not organized. Like, and keep in mind what I'm saying. I'm not saying that we have to have criminals, we need to have criminals, and, criminals should not go to jail. What I am saying is that it has to be organized. Law enforcement needs to understand that there will always be an underworld, right? There will always be, dark alleys and what, how can I put this? Industries where, there will always be the streets. I guess that's the best way I can put it. There will always be the streets and there will always be criminals. But if you have people that are in charge of that and people that structure it and people that say, hey, this is the cutoff point. This is what's going to be allowed. This is what will not be allowed, and there will be repercussions for that. Then I think we'll be in a little bit more of a safer world, right? Because let's be honest about it. People don't care about going to jail. I mean, think about this. You have homeless people that commit crimes every single day just to go to jail because they get a roof over their head, they get AC, they get 3 meals a day, and they get the bait, you know? So it's not like other countries where people are terrified going to jail because it's going to be hard and tough for them. Over here, it's kind of like we have this expression that they say, club fed, especially if you go to federal prison, it's like, hey, you're in a freaking 4-star hotel. But you know, the reality of it is people are not afraid of law enforcement and people are not afraid of going to jail, but they are afraid of other criminals, right? And I like to use this example. How people here in America love to say, well, we're unfair to police and they want to defund the police, right? We're unfair to cops. But if you notice, whenever a cop stops someone over and the situation escalates, in most of those cases, is because the police pull somebody over. And keep in mind, every law enforcement officer here in the United States carries a gun with them and is visible. We can see it, right? And they pull somebody over, or they come to a scene and they say, "Hey, we need your driver's license, ID, or whatever the case be." And the people, they don't comply. They argue with the police. They get up in their faces. They pull out their phones because they're not afraid of the police. They understand that the police are being held back by certain rules, right? There are certain rules and certain things that the police officer can do and cannot do. And even if the police officer use some level of force to restrain someone, it's automatically called excessive force and the person wants to sue. And that's a whole different story. We're not going to get too much into that. But if you are walking and a criminal walks up to you and they pull out a gun and they say, you know, give me your purse and your wallet. You give it to them. The reason for that is because you know that that criminal or that thief is not constrained by any type of rules. And that person can, lay you down right there where you are, where you stand. So you are actually in fear at that point, and you comply with a criminal, but you won't comply with a law enforcement officer. So I'm saying that in the sense of people really don't care or respect law enforcement. But if we have organizations, which we've had before, I mean, I grew up here in Miami, Fort Lauderdale. I've lived in different parts of the U.S. And I think every single one of us at some point, if you're around my age, I'm 43 years old. If you remember back in the 90s, early 80s, your neighborhood, you can throw a block party or throw a party, a house party, and have people from your neighborhood come in there, and nobody's fighting, nobody's shooting. You don't got to worry about somebody else coming by and doing a drive-by because people understood that neighborhood had its own protection. And if you did something in that neighborhood, you were going to be held accountable. You could not just go into any other neighborhood and do something, especially without permission, right? But now, you know, you have to worry about everywhere you go, because there's really no one in the underworld who's actually saying you can throw this party and you can do something and you never have to worry about anything happening. You know, in the hip hop community, they got this thing called checking in, where you check in if you go to a different city and you know that a certain person is really has a lot of influence in that city. May not necessarily run the city, but they have a lot of influence. You call the person up and say, "Hey, I'm going to be in your city. I need you to hang out with me, send a couple guys with me, or just letting you know I'm here." So this way, they know that the chances of something happening is like slim next to none. Doesn't necessarily mean it won't happen because that person doesn't run the city, but it's good to check in with the locals. But nowadays, we don't have anything like that. I think law enforcement, they did an overreach with the RICO acts. They arrested a lot of local gangs, a lot of organized groups, and right now, this is the result of it, because criminals will always exist. Like I want to make that very clear. I'm not saying that we have to have criminals and we shouldn't prosecute them, but law enforcement should understand that there has to be a decent balance, And I think if you look at a country like Japan has the Yakuza, which is one of the richest and most violent criminal organizations. They are in Japan or in Southeast Asia. They also have the triads, right? But law enforcement, they understood that these uh, these groups will always exist. So they had a codependent situation with each other, right? So there'll always be people that go outside or not respect the rule of law and they do certain things. And law enforcement will reach out to the Yakuza or to the triad members and say, "Hey, look, this horrific crime happened. And we need your help taking care of this." And they'll be like, "Hey, that we didn't sanction that. That was not something and that's not something we want to allow because that disrupt business." So they go ahead and they get involved and they handle the situation. They typically catch the person, turn the person over to the police department, or handle it themselves. But we need to have a situation like that where we feel like where I got to put this into. I'm trying not to sound like I'm advocating for criminals, but quite honestly, I think it goes back to an old adjective that I used to say. An old question I used to ask people. I used to say, "Look, would you rather a smart criminal or a dumb criminal?" Right? And I've always preferred to deal with smart criminals, right? Because with a smart criminal, they understood a smart criminal commits a crime, they want to get away with it. So in order for them to get away with it, They have to be as quiet as possible about it, and there has to be this to be as small amount of damage or violence used as possible in order to, commit the crime, make the money, and get away with it. Where you would have a dumb criminal, and you hear them say this all the time when you watch the news or you watch these videos online. The person say, "Well, I don't care. I don't give a damn. I don't, take me to jail." And they're willing to throw their lives away just over something stupid like somebody stepping on their feet, or they would, It reminds me of these 4 or 5 young men down here in Miami who walked into a smoke bar to rob a cigarette store, and when the owner ran away, keep in mind, the owner didn't grab a gun and shoot at them. The owner decided, standing behind the counter, the owner decided not to comply and just to run away. And they didn't even grab anything. They just started shooting at the owner and ran out the store without anything. It's kind of like I don't, dumb criminals are the most violent ones and the most dangerous ones. And this is why I say we probably need to have, this is why my perspective, not right or wrong, I'm not saying I'm right or wrong. My perspective is we should have, on some level, organized crime, and law enforcement should not be using the RICO Act as readily as they are using it, just to say that they're cleaning up the streets, but they're creating rooms for some of these dangerous, stupid, unorganized groups to come in and cause chaos. And you guys can see the level of chaos that's happening in America right now. I just think that needs to be said.